Good evening. Your Excellency, Ambassador to the Federal Republic of Ghana, Dr. Scotia, good evening. Distinguished guests, students, professional colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Welcome to the UN Pathways Ambassadors Forum. Tonight we have a conversation with Ambassador Martha Ama Ackay-Pobi, who is representing the Federal Republic of Ghana. I have the honor and privilege to welcome her here because I consider Ghana my second home. I am originally from Nigeria, but I did a project. I did my Carnegie Fellowship in Ghana, where I developed the second Masters in Nursing program at Central University. They only have one, which is currently now at University of Ghana at Legon. Central University is the second one. However, that program is on hold because we are waiting accreditation, and also we are waiting to have the MOUs finalized and things to be streamlined by the two countries, by FDU and Ghana. Dr. Scotia, I'm happy you are doing this. No, I'm not implying it's your fault, but I'm happy it's back on the table. Something is back on the table, so that's yay for me. So Ambassador, welcome for all you do. And I'll just have bio. It's on the back of the profile that you have. For the sake of time, I'll just skip on it. She is a career diplomat, having served the Federal Ministry of Foreign Affairs for almost 30 years, so which means she's good at what she's doing. And not only that she's good at what she's doing, she is a woman. Yes. So Ambassador, welcome, and we need to, we are looking forward to hearing from you and all you have to do to articulate to make these things go forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pat. I'd like to just go over the ground rules for this afternoon's event. The program will take the form of a conversation between myself and our guest. After the conversation, we will open the floor for questions from the audience. At that time, I would ask that you raise your hand, keep your hand up, and someone will come around with a microphone. And as we are video recording this, I would also ask you to silence your phones at this time if you've not already done so. One more note, I'd like to acknowledge several people in the audience tonight, particularly Mr. Bernard Quanson, who is the Consul General of Ghana, as well as two of his colleagues, King Asamaning and Harry Reynolds, also of the consulate. We were joined briefly by Assemblyman Gordon Johnson. Oh, here he is, right up front. Thank you for coming, Assemblyman. So I'd like to begin by asking how such a brilliant and obviously learned person as yourself wound up in diplomacy. Our students always like to hear where that came from. Were you planning on a career in public service and diplomacy? Did that come? How did you come to be where you are?
Thank you very much, Dr. Scotia. And permit me to begin, before I answer that question by saying a big thank you to this university for the invitation. I also want to say thank you to some of the distinguished people we have in our presence today, including Assemblyman Johnson, and also KGV, represented here by Kin Asomani. It's very heartwarming to hear that already before I came, there's discussion about doing something in Ghana, and the partnership is very critical. I do hope that in the course of this evening's discussion, we will all come to appreciate the importance of such partnerships and how they feed into Ghana's development efforts, and in actual fact, what it represents for other countries in the sub-region of West Africa and beyond. But now to the question. I guess I always was interested in international relations, particularly at the age of about 12, 13, when I was in high school, and I joined an organization called the Ghana UN Students Association. That was where I began to develop the interest. And when I was in the university, I read English and philosophy. That was my major. At that time, I wasn't too sure whether I was going to end up in the foreign ministry, because it's not easy to get into the foreign ministry. There are too many, the criteria, you know, it's not easy. So many people want to get there. You have to go through a whole rigorous process of selection. But I must say that I was not deterred. I had the opportunity to work with a civil society organization. This was also based in Geneva. I met them through at a conference in Nairobi in 1985 when I attended the UN conference there. And they asked me to do an internship. It was in human rights. That was in 1986. I spent the year in Geneva. It involved a lot of travel. It involved being a part of conferences, preparing papers on human rights. After that, I did my master's degree in development studies, specializing in women and development. And soon after that, I got a chance to join the Foreign Service. And in January 1989, I started work in the ministry. And this is where I am now. I've served in a number of countries. I'm sure you've read on my CV. I started in Moscow, Switzerland, Israel, Washington, D.C., South Africa, and now I'm in New York as a permanent rep.
And those are some of the most important posts in the diplomatic service.
I guess so.
Yes. One point that I'd like to pull out of your account is that if you do, and this is for the students in the audience, if you do join our United Nations Association Club, you will eventually become a UN ambassador. Would you agree with that proposition?
Well, you could, high probability, because it actually, we discuss whatever is being discussed at the UN. We are advocates for the UN. In my time, the issues were apartheid, and also we're looking at the Middle East situation. We were talking about a new international economic order that would allow countries such as Ghana to advance. And so it was, for a student, it was very exciting. We had the opportunity to air our views. We read a lot about what was happening around the world. And I think, yeah, you stand a very good chance of coming this way.
Good. I myself have never been to Ghana, but it is on my list of must-visit countries. Not just because of the wonderful chocolate, but we'll come back to that. But because of all the wonderful people from Ghana who I have met at the UN and here at Fairleigh Dickinson. Could you tell us a little something about Ghana itself and perhaps what it was like for you growing up there?
Well, that's my favorite subject, Ghana. It's a country of about 27 million. We think we are located in the middle of the world. because you find longitude 0, that's the Greenwich meridian, and then just 5 degrees above the equator. So that crosses, the world. So we are right there in the center. It's a warm climate, friendly peoples, hospitable, proverbial hospitality. Talk about Ghana. Peace-loving. We are a bastion of democracy in Africa, and peaceful changeover of government. You've heard about conflicts maybe in West Africa, but I'm not sure you've heard of any in Ghana. That attests to our desire to live in peace and in peaceful coexistence with our neighbors. Growing up in Ghana, it's one of the unique features about our country is the way we've tried to integrate, even though we have different ethnic groups, so many of them in actual fact, about 13 major tribal groupings. The educational system that we had, for instance, in high school, we had a lot of boarding schools. You spent months living with others from different parts of the country, and it helped to build a sense of nationhood. We were one people, and so your classmates could be from another religion, from another part of the country, and it helped us to form, build our nation from, Africa's borders were artificially more or less crafted, and so you have people from different, you may even have family across the border in Cote d'Ivoire or in Lomé or in Burkina Faso. So to have a sense of being a one people, that helped. And so I have friends from different parts of the country. We intermarry. We love each other's food. It's a beautiful country to be in. I urge you all to visit. We have wonderful things to see. Forts and castles dotted along the coast. The history behind that, many of you would have read about, has to do with the slave trade, where the Europeans built these as the trading posts. We also have ecotourism. For those interested in nature, we have the Kakum Forest. And we have these wonderful canopy walkways where you can literally walk above the top of the trees. We have wonderful beaches, if you're into that. And we have festivals. And, Ghana is one of the countries that has preserved its traditions and culture. And you see us always in our kente or in our Made in Ghana prints. And so this is something that you see quite often. And when you visit, you get a taste of these festivals. You get a taste of the life of the people. Very vibrant growing up there. And so just to say, it's a country that we all love when we come from there, and we urge you to come and experience that too.
Thank you. So I take that as an invitation for all of us to visit Ghana. Now, Ghana achieved independence in 1957. So your parents must have been coming of age during the lead up to that Declaration of Independence and then independence itself. Did they tell you stories about those times when you were growing up? How much of that moment was part of your formative years?
Yes, we heard and we read a little bit. It was a very euphoric time for Ghanaians. Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, our first president, was a Pan-Africanist. He gave us the sense of pride of our Africanness. Ghana was the first black country south of the Sahara to be independent from colonialism. And so there's this feeling of pride which the parents shared. And at that time, because of the Pan-Africanist spirit in Ghana, we had a lot of Africans, African nationalists, people who were also fighting for decolonization in their country, staying in Ghana. There are many Africans, particularly I met South Africans who had Ghanaian passports in those days. In London, where we set up our High Commission, we had a home where every African could walk into and feel like, yes, I'm also Ghanaian. So this sense of pride in what we had achieved was pretty much inculcated into me growing up, and always, you have to go to school, you have to do well in school because it is education that is going to get you far. This is where, education is very important for many Ghanaian families, because that is what you need to move along. And so, very much so, yes, it was a time when it felt good to know about the history, how your country had come out of colonialism to what it was growing up. Yeah.
Now, as permanent representative of Ghana to the United Nations, it's your responsibility to represent the entire nation in all its complexity, as well, of course, the government. May I ask you to tell us a little bit about what is on your agenda, what is on Ghana's agenda in the context of the United Nations today?
Thank you very much for that question. Maybe I'll just begin a little into why we have certain areas of interest based on our history and our desire to protect our territorial integrity. We want to also ensure that we are in a world where the conditions are conducive for us to grow, to advance the interests of our people, to achieve socioeconomic advancement, to live in peace and in harmony with others. These have informed how we interact with the rest of the world. At the time of independence, as I've already stated, many African countries then were seeking independence. And Ghana at that time felt that the United Nations was the right forum for us to do that, to advance this decolonization, because we had a ready platform to leapfrog the process. And so we used our membership that we joined the UN on 8th March, 2 days after our independence. We were admitted as members. And since then, we have tried to use the platform to advance social justice. At independence, our motto as a country is freedom and justice, and that is exactly what we sought to promote there. Currently, we are very much engaged in different areas. Under the area of peace and security, we are one of the top 10 troop contributing countries for international peacekeeping. In 1960, a very young nation that we were, we contributed a full battalion to the first United Nations peacekeeping that was in the Congo. And after that, we've been everywhere, in the Middle East, in Asia, as far as Haiti, we are there. In Africa, different arenas of conflict, we are there. Currently in Mali, we've been in Cote d'Ivoire, Liberia, and so many other places. So we just want to ensure that, particularly for West Africa, the sub-region has peace, that we can advance socioeconomic development. We're also particularly interested in the area of human rights. The United Nations works on 3 pillars: peace and security, human rights, and sustainable development. You cannot advance any of them without the others. And so it is critical that we work hand in hand on all the issues, particularly on human rights. Where you don't have justice, you're going to have conflict. And Ghana is very much, it's one of the countries, and I feel very proud to say this, that we have a healthy respect for the rule of law. We have a number of international treaties, over 250 international treaties and conventions we've signed on to. We are pretty much interested in ensuring that international law is adhered to. At the UN currently, we are life chair of a program of assistance. This is an advisory committee on the program of assistance that is to help better appreciation for international law, the teaching of international law, interpretation of it. And the idea is that developing countries that don't have the critical mass in terms of capacity to interpret these need help. And therefore, the idea is to enable us find some money to train people from developing countries in international law. And we've been doing this for 50 years. We're also pretty much involved in the sustainable development debate. Every developing country in the world is interested in that, and we are very much engaged. Currently, our president, Nana Akufo-Addo, is co-chair of the advocacy group that was set up by the Secretary General to advance the Sustainable Development Goals. Their job is to ensure that people get to know about it and governments take on the challenge to implement. And so we are very much there, and that involves a whole lot of activities. Climate change issues, of course, are relevant. And if you take, again, going back to West Africa, there is a clear link between environmental changes, climate change, and development, and peace and security. You take the Lake Chad region, which can currently, all the problems with the Boko Haram and so on. We have lots of young people in our part of the world who need to find jobs. Unfortunately, Lake Chad has dried up, and therefore all the livelihoods around the lake are no longer available. So what do the young people do? What do the women do? And this is the fertile ground that extremists tend to tap into. And so you see clearly the link between the drying up of a lake, terrorism, peace and security, and development. And so we try to look at all of these together and see how we can, with other countries at the UN, work to improve the situation.
Thank you very much for that. You mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals, which do tend to come up from time to time during our United Nations Pathway Forums. And before we sat down together, we were chatting a little bit about the importance of partnerships. Partnerships not just between countries, but between governments and the private sector, the nonprofit sector, NGOs. Is it your sense that the United Nations is more open to partnerships with the private sector, whether it be for-profit or nonprofit, than they have been in the past?
Absolutely. Partnerships are important. That's why it stands as also a separate goal of the SDGs. We're just talking about it. He was asking which is goal 17, and told us that has to do with partnerships. Indeed, it is critical, because just like governments can't do it alone, the United Nations on its own, of course, the United Nations is made up of member states. It is as strong as member states want it to be in terms of financing. But what I think that we're talking about now more and more is to see how the organization can play the catalytic role of bringing on board the different areas. I mean, you're bringing on board educational institutions such as yours. You are bringing the private sector on board. You are bringing governments here, civil society organizations. What can we do together in any particular, on any particular goal of the SDGs to get them implemented? Because it's critical. We have the Global Compact, the United Nations Global Compact, that brings together the private sector to see how they can also impact positively upon the implementation of the SDGs. They themselves have adopted a set of principles that they want to work. Every company that signs on to the Global Compact ensures that within its operations, it is mindful of the SDGs and how it can get it done. For instance, gender issues will have to be looked at. What is their impact on health? So there is that, but also the partnerships is critical. And I'm really pleased that what you're seeking to do with this university in partnership with the private sector here in New Jersey, going into Ghana, working with an educational institution. How do you create jobs? For instance, if it is in the area, you're training people within a particular locality. Does it relate to job creation? Does it relate to environmental protection? Does it relate to the urbanization issues, gender issues, getting jobs for the young people, agricultural development, agro-processing? What is it that you can do within the kind of partnerships that you're building to advance the SDGs and to advance the socioeconomic, sustainable development of the communities that you involve with? So I think it's very critical, and I really applaud the university for what it's doing. Of course, with the New Jersey authorities, I hope to see in the near future something going there. And I was sharing with you also the possibility of even doing a side event at the UN as a success story, how this evolves, how you build the partnerships and what it was able to achieve. What are the challenges? What can the UN do to facilitate solutions to some of these bottlenecks? So it is something that I really encourage, and I hope that you can do it and share. The important thing is to share the experience with others, and the UN is the right forum to do this. And Ghana will be quite happy to sponsor such an activity, work in collaboration with all the actors involved.
Thank you, and we would, of course, would look forward to doing that as well. That's the end of the softball question portion of the of the discussion. Now we get into the tough ones. We look at emerging economies around the world, whether they be in Africa, Asia, Latin America, Eastern Europe, and we see them largely focusing economically on exports and still on the export of raw materials, whether it be minerals or timber, or in the case of Ghana, chocolate, coffee. And we see those countries struggling to take over the value-added side of those businesses, whether it's the processing of a raw material or the manufacturing of a finished product. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that issue in general and how it relates to Ghana in particular.
Yes, indeed. Adding value to raw materials and the whole structure of economies of countries such as Ghana it's a very important one for us. In fact, I just want to use a comment that our president made. He said, looking back, he thought the structure of our country hadn't changed since the last governor, the British governor. And basically we are growing cocoa, we are mining gold, diamonds. Now we found some oil and natural gas. So what are we doing with this? For the past 60 years of independence, what have we done? How are we adding value to these? Of course, there are challenges. Sometimes when we've gone through different economic models, in the past we had the import substitution model of, they didn't work out too well. We had state-owned companies at the very early stages of independence. They didn't work out. Now we're looking to the private sector to engage. Because, and adding value, we want to start from what we have, that's agriculture, since that is what we produce largely. And so we are very much interested in inviting the private sector to help us along there. It is a very lucrative thing to do business in Ghana. We have a very attractive incentives for the private sector as enshrined in our Investment Promotion Act and laws that have been passed. All the protections are there, and it's critical that we attract the right people and the right businesses so that we build on what we have. The president has announced an industrialization plan that sort of manufacturing, and basically the base of that would be what we have, agriculture adding value to gold, for instance. We produce the gold and send out, but we need to turn that maybe into jewelry. We need to make chocolates, and it is growing. For many years, we just had one chocolate manufacturing concern. Now we have lots of them. And it will interest you to know that there are young people who are, some of them have come together, and they are making chocolates. And these are very good chocolates. The idea, of course, is marketing and getting them here into Europe, into where we can sell. And quite often we come up against all kinds of barriers. Sometimes they are non-tariff kind of barriers. They have all these. I remember some years ago, we came up with difficulties with selling even the cocoa because of the incidence of child labor on some cocoa farms. It took government a lot to explain and to clarify that in our case, they were not it wasn't child labor. It was children on holiday, and I'm sure in America, in certain parts of the country, children helping parents on farms in holiday times. And so it took a lot to counter that kind of obstacle. But indeed, it is important for us because you can only create jobs for people if such ventures ensue, and you can only do this with the private sector. And so we very much encourage that, and all the conditions are there to make sure that profits are repatriated, that all the capital coming in it's in order. And so I do agree that adding value is critical to advancing our economies.
For those of the audience who aren't familiar with chocolate from Ghana, you don't know what you're missing. It is without exception the finest in the world. And when I look at the products on the shelves here in the US or in Europe when I travel there, it proudly declares Ghana, big letters. That's your trademark, isn't it? You own Ghana. Can't you sue these people and get like just a little piece of that back?
I guess we could.
I think
Maybe
King is
giving
taking
us an
notes
idea.
here.
Maybe the Consul General can take notes and
The Consul General will take action tomorrow.
you take
That's
action
right.
tomorrow.
I'll be sure to remind him of that.
That's right.
But it's great chocolate.
But I mean, I make light of the question of the use of the name Ghana to sell products. When a country is so rich in resources, but doesn't own the right to that resource. And we see this everywhere. Countries who have, declared their independence from Europe or now going back 50, 60 years in most cases, but still don't own the resources that represents the national wealth of the country. We've seen some countries try to do things like nationalize those resources, and you made passing reference to government-owned companies and industries. How does Ghana navigate the path between an open market, free market, and the national interest? I'll give you an example. I was reading recently, I do read a lot about chocolate from Ghana. Yes, I have not been fishing for a King's Bite, but the fact that a King's Bite bar has been placed upon the table before me by Mr. Reynolds of the consulate in New York City, that only strengthens my resolve and commitment to the partnership between our nations. What was I asking you? Oh. What was I asking you?
You were going to provide Provide an example.
Oh, the cocoa from Ghana is so prized, and the market price for it is so high on the export market that companies in Ghana that would process the raw cocoa into chocolate cannot afford to purchase the natural product of their own country in many cases, and certainly not in the volumes that they would need to produce chocolate on an industrial scale like Cadbury does, or Nestle, or any of the large conglomerates. So the practical question is, how does a country that wants to be quote unquote open for business, that wants to be part of the free trade movement of globalization, that wants to attract investment and buyers, how do they navigate those two imperatives, the imperative of their own economic development and the desire for openness?
Well, very interesting question. Just to clarify one thing, in the way we Ghana's cocoa industry is not on the basis of large plantations like you would have in maybe Cote d'Ivoire. These are small peasant holdings, and they sell the beans to the cocoa marketing board. I think there's another company that buys this, and then they trade this outside the country. I'm not too sure of whatever legal limitations they have, but I certainly believe that it is possible to get the cocoa you need for processing in Ghana. The situation may not be the same in other situations, but just because of the way the cocoa industry is managed in Ghana, this, I think, should be possible. And I believe that those small-scale companies that are coming up with different types of chocolates are managing within that. My own grandparents were cocoa farmers. My father's mother had her cocoa farm. She built a huge house in Kumasi from her own proceeds, and that kind of. So there's that. I think there's that leeway when it comes to that. But the bigger question of control of resources, that is an issue that I think we all need to take up at the at an international level, because some of these relationships have been there for years. It's not easy to break out of them. I mean, the oil industry, for instance, how much of a country's oil can come into the country? It is not owned by them. It is the companies that are exploiting the resource, and we only get a percentage of it. And hence, I remember very well when we struck oil, a lot of us were excited. Oh, finally, Ghana, we have oil. We're going to go very far. And someone explained to him, wait a minute, you know how much of that comes to Ghana? And that gave me a shock. I mean, less than 12% of whatever we get for what is taken out of the country actually comes back to us. And so it is true. Who owns the resources? I mean, the agreements we've had in the past in the area of bauxite with Kaiser Aluminium, we had to renegotiate over a long period of time. The building of the Akosombo Dam, the hydroelectric plant, most of the electricity generated there had to go for the smelting of the aluminium, not what we produced, because we have aluminium. All the aluminium that was mined was shipped out, and another product was shipped in for smelting. So it was like part of a process that was done in our country, but with much of the electricity produced, we had to renegotiate that to get more when we needed more power for our own industry. So it's an ongoing thing, and we need to be able to break out of some of these I wouldn't call them contracts, but some of the way we do things to give countries like ours a chance to leap forward in terms of development. But also, I think a lot also depends on the vision of the leadership of the country. And indeed, you can maneuver your way out of some of them. And I think we have the right leadership in the country at the moment to do that. So I'm very hopeful that the vision that we have, and as I indicated, if we're starting from agro-processing, if we're producing cassava and cassava starch, what can we do with that? You know, and so you build the industries on the basis of what you have and what you can control with private funding, and gradually we'll get there. So I think that we can negotiate our way out of it. We can work through the difficulties with the support that I know that we have from outside. It's changing. The way things were done are changing. And I think that now, at least from what I see at the UN, those relationships, if the world is, what happens in one corner of the world affects the other. If countries in Africa are not allowed to develop, you have the migration question. People can't be stopped. They'll continue to go and look for greener pastures elsewhere. Somebody who is starving would naturally want to move to a place where they can find food. Someone in conflict wouldn't want to stay there. They would want to move out. And so it is in the interest of everybody to ensure that each corner of the globe has a minimum level of development. Otherwise, we will continue to have these movements. And now we are actually negotiating a global compact on migration and refugee flows at the UN, because Europe is worried about people coming across the Mediterranean. Some of them are drowning. We've all seen it in the media space. Now, how do you address that? Countries in Africa cannot hold them. People move. And so the argument is there, all the right arguments are there to ensure that we are enabled to develop with the resources that we have, with private capital, and then we can ensure basic living conditions, health, education, food, just for people to realize their dignity as human beings wherever they are. And I think that would be a basic starting point for all. Then we can all develop. After all, the SDGs is about leaving no one behind. And this is a very practical way of looking at resolving the world's issues.
Thank you for that. If we may, I'd like to turn to regional questions in West Africa. You mentioned in your introduction that Ghana is a bastion of stability, a bastion of democracy in a region that has experienced considerable turmoil, both with reference to civil wars within countries like Liberia, Côte d'Ivoire, and others, and also a lot of cross-border difficulties. How does Ghana, as a practical matter, try to keep the peace, try to preserve the peace within such a troubled region?
Ghana, I wouldn't say we go it alone. We work in concert with other ECOWAS countries. It is important that the sub-regional body, which basically was formed in 1975. The idea was to have an integrated West Africa. Our economies are integrated. We have a single currency, free movement of people, goods and services, to feed on the large population we have and the resources, if you put West Africa together, that we can actually advance just with the 15, 16, we were 16, now we're 15 countries there. And so along the line, we realized also that the number of conflicts, just too many conflicts, and taking attention away from the economic agenda, and therefore having to ensure that these conflicts are resolved. So we work alongside other countries. Basically, use of good officers, talking to ourselves. In the case, I'll just give the recent case of the Gambia, when the former president Yahya Jammeh refused to hand over after he lost the elections. The kind of actions that the leadership took, a number of West African heads of state went to talk to him and to tell him, listen, you have to listen to the people. They voted against you, you have to leave. And after a while, they said, if you don't leave, we are going to send our troops in to bring the rightfully elected president in. After all, waiting also for the Security Council to endorse that action. And we saw what happened. Yahya Jammeh left, and President Barrow was sworn in. So Gambia is now flourishing. They're going on with their life as a country. Without the conflict could have come. The military could have stepped in. It happened also in Burkina Faso. Again, the leaders, including Ghana's president, went and told the one who has staged the coup d'etat that no, this is not going to work. You have to leave. And then they enforced it. So I think that the regional body has shown that it can make a difference. We don't wait for the Security Council to intervene in our matters. We are able and capable of doing it ourselves. And our leaders are committed to the principles that they've all signed on to. And so Ghana is very much a part of this. We believe in multilateralism. We believe in working together with others to achieve that objective. And that's the role that we've sought to play in all our interactions. We've had, we chaired ECOWAS, I think former President Rawlings, former President Kufuor, and former President Mahama at some point also chaired this regional body. And we try to influence positively when things are not going so well in the region.
Thank you. Before we open the floor to questions, I'd like to ask you one more question, and this is a deeply selfish one. My niece, who is a freshman in high school, is writing a research paper this week on, and I'm not making this up, the relevance of traditional African religions on contemporary society. And I'm wondering if you could just spend a minute or so giving us your impression of the relevance of traditional African religions on contemporary society in Ghana, and then I will continue my established lead as the favorite uncle.
Yes, you can tell your niece that it is still very relevant. Just because, we never got it out of our system, Christian or Muslim. And it is so into us. I'll tell you what, my husband is an Episcopal priest, and quite often he says, we pray to God, Jesus Christ and all of that, but when push comes to shove, people always like to go and consult. They go and consult the local gods, let me put it that way, because, Jesus Christ is very nice, you can go to him for forgiveness. But those ones, they don't forgive. So, this is just a joke, but it is, it's true. It's like for some people, double insurance. That's how my husband puts it. Now, of course, the Christian religion, Muslim, they are pretty strong. but it is still very much ingrained in some sectors of the society. It's not completely gone. And sometimes the basis of it, we believe in Ghana, the Akan, they believe in Nyankopong, called God. We believe our God is a God of Saturday, Kwame. In many respects, it ties in with the Jewish Sabbath God, Sabbath. There are attributes of God that are very similar and to the Christian faith, but in our religion, in our belief, we have the lesser ones. We have God, and we have smaller ones, and they, you don't need to, you know, it depends on what they can do for you, basically. So it's a kind of strange juxtaposition. I'm sure my sister from Nigeria, she's having a good laugh. It's pretty much with us still. So it is relevant. It's not completely gone. People do resort to all kinds of, faith systems. Let me put it that way. So she can talk to me later. I'll give her some more information.
Good, thank you. So we can now have some questions from the audience. I would ask that you raise your hands, keep your hand up, and Ms. Palmer will come around with the microphone. So who would like to ask the first question? On the aisle in the center, and if you could stand up and introduce yourself and then speak into the device.
Hi, my name is Kay Ann Stewart. I'm an alumni. I graduated last May. My question to you is probably an future question, answer the best way you feel. You mentioned that your interest in public relations began at a very tender age of 12. I would like to say that my interest in global issues began very young as well, but I didn't know how to navigate, I wanted to go into like healthcare or the medical field, and I didn't know how to infuse those two worlds. So are there any recommendations at all on how to get involved from a local level into a more global society?
And why don't we take one more question and then you can tackle them together. Oh, come now, on the right.
Hi, thank you so much for taking your precious time out of no time to be with us today. My name is Jude. I'm from Nigeria. I have a question. I have a lot of Ghanaian friends, and many of them are not related. They have no interest in Kenyan politics. So my question is this: why do many young, patriotic Kenyan citizens shy away from participating in Ghanaian political leadership positions?
Another difficult question.
I know.
This is why I'm the professor and not the ambassador.
Okay, let me start with the lady's question. From local to global, right? How do you advance your interests into what you want to become? I don't know. For my personal experience, I don't want to say it was luck, because I think I worked at it. I wasn't shy to take on positions or to do certain kinds of work. I made time, if it meant even 6 months not doing what normally I should be doing. And I will start right from high school. I mean, I could have spent all my time just with the books, but I chose to join so many organizations in school, and every afternoon you had to spend time doing something. I was a member of the Red Cross, for instance, which meant that within the community, we had to go from village to village every Sunday to do either Sunday school or to help teach the children about little health, issues. We had a basket of plaster and antiseptics, and you go around to clean the little, wounds on the villagers, put plaster on. Sometimes they hadn't had their bath in the morning. You had to literally take them to give them a bath before. So these were things that we did. And I think just set time to do those things that you want to do in life. I think they also doors open for you along the line. And don't hesitate to take the bold step. I don't know what exactly you want to do, but even you read medicine, you're a nurse. There's so much you can do within the UN setting, for instance. In terms of public health care, there's so much happening around. There are people who are organizing missions to Africa to treat people. I know people in North Carolina, they organize themselves. Some are Ghanaian, some are not. They visit rural communities for 2-3 weeks in a year. And these lead to other things. In my experience, that's what happened. And I did an internship, as I said, in human rights. As an intern, I found out about the Institute of Social Studies in The Hague. I applied, I was admitted. And so it was one step leading to the other. And then try to shape your experiences to fit where you want to go. So you need to build on the local to get up there. And don't shy away from it. I think you can do it. For Jude, I don't know. I mean, as a young person, I didn't think of politics, but I tell you now, there are lots of Ghanaian young people in politics. Maybe it's the people you encounter here in America. They probably don't have that kind of avenue, but most of the political parties have youth organizations, particularly at the tertiary level, where they meet and they talk about the party's ideology and how to help in terms of winning elections and so on. So now it's very active. And the president now has appointed a lot of young people, very, very young people into responsible positions. And it's encouraging, I think, for more young people to get there. Those who want to see a change will have to get involved. And so they are realizing that, and they are actively participating. So maybe we need to talk to the young Ghanaians here. And I'll talk to the Consul General about that. We have to get them interested in the politics of the country because it is important to do that. So thank you for giving us that information. We'll work on it.
Let's have a couple more questions, please. Two questions from up front. Let's start with the gentleman on the right, then the gentleman on the left. Please, my left, your right.
Okay. Hi, I'm Professor Robert Allen in the Criminal Justice Department, and I was curious about your country's relationship with the United States, and if there are several issues where we see eye to eye. I think that's probably an easier question. And there are some issues in the world scene where we don't see eye to eye, and perhaps we're working on different sides. So I'm just curious what you thought about that.
Professor Bolmel has a promising career ahead of him in diplomacy.
That's great.
No, I'm Herbert Weeder, and
Microphone.
I just cannot help it. Sometimes, in the Bible it says, if you don't speak up, the rocks will speak.
Yeah.
And I feel that way. I just want to thank you. You have given us a real gift today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And for our relations with the U.S., excellent relations. At the UN, talking about the multilateral forum now, we work together on a number of issues. I think when it comes to, talked about human rights issues and international law, very supportive, the US, that is, to some of the work that we are doing. And also on the principle of responsibility to protect. Ghana is one of the champions of that principle, that in times of conflict, where it is the responsibility of countries to protect their citizens from mass atrocities, and where that country is unable to do that, they should seek assistance. If they are unwilling for that, then it is the international community's responsibility to save the people from killings. And this principle has had difficulties because of what happened, I think, in Libya, after the international community went in on that principle, and the way the exit was, and what we see happening in Libya today. So whenever we raise the issue, we get a lot of opposition from some member states who say, hey, watch it, what happened in Libya? Don't use the responsibility to protect as a pretext for regime change. And that's what we keep hearing. But we are not deterred because the principle is a good principle. And maybe we need to fine-tune how we engage, how the UN goes in at any point in time, or how member states go in to see if the situation, we must always have a good exit strategy. Then we also work on what we call the Kigali principles, and this has to do with protection of civilians during times of conflict and peacekeeping. And any country that signs onto the Kigali principles is saying that the troops that I send for peacekeeping are going to protect civilians. You know what happened in Rwanda? Whilst the UN was there, people died. There was genocide going on, and the UN was there, and they were saying the mandate of the UN did not allow them at that time to do certain things, and therefore they sat helpless as people were being killed. And this is something that a number of us countries have signed on to, also in the area of sexual abuse and exploitation, because we've heard of cases where troops supposed to keep the peace and supposed to protect civilians are the people who are now abusing, particularly the women and children. So we work closely on those issues as well. In peacekeeping, again, we share ideas on better and effective peacekeeping. For instance, the use of unmanned aerial vehicles, some of the sensitivities about it, we discuss on those. And then generally, when it comes to the SDGs and all the other subjects, we think that we agree. Of course, at the Security Council, there's something else going on. And we are not a member of the Security Council. But we feel like so many other countries that where we have serious crimes against humanity, the veto powers need to reconsider not using the veto to block decisions. And this is, I think, one area that we disagree. There are a number of countries that have come together to more or less entreat the big powers not to do that. I know that France and the UK, as a matter of principle, do not use their veto in fact, they don't use it at all, but more so when it comes to such incidents. So this is an area that we hope that the US would come along with us. But on the issue of North Korea sometime last year, we co-sponsored a resolution that the US asked us to join, even though we were not members of the Security Council. Ghana was quite happy to sign on to that resolution because we realize how serious the issue of North Korea's nuclear program is for the entire globe. And so I'm pleased to say that, yes, we work. Of course, on the bilateral front, it's amazing. We have a lot of US companies in Ghana. For our oil, it was Cosmos Energy that first struck oil. And the relationship has grown. We have Coca-Cola, we have mining companies. The list is endless. I'm sure the Consul General can provide more information for you there. And we are very pleased with the kind of relationship we have. US has supported us in our electoral, electoral processes. USAID, very, very active in development and social interventions in Ghana. And many years back we had the Peace Corps. I remember I had a couple of teachers from the US who were part of the Peace Corps as a student. So the relationship has been very good, and I think that we can only build on it to do more. And that's why I'm looking forward to seeing New Jersey. This project excites me so much because it's only a continuation of that, the excellent relations that we have.
I think that may be an excellent note on which to end, but if you'll permit me, I just want to make a couple of comments in summary. So many of you have been coming to these UN Pathway events for many years, and we've had a lot of speakers, but there's been, Sarah, don't go anywhere. There's been, for the past 7 years, a very special person who behind the scenes has worked to organize every one of these programs, dozens upon dozens upon dozens. I lost count of how many UN Pathways events she's organized. And I'm happy and saddened to tell all of you that Sarah Horn Palmer's last UN Pathways event as organizer is tonight. She's moving on to wonderful opportunity. However, I hope she comes back often as a member of the audience and a participant, because otherwise we would miss her far too much. So Sarah, would you please come up?
Thank you, Jason. It was really special for me to work here. I kind of totally slid into it. Like, I didn't have maybe the vision, what you said, what you had since a little kid. I think I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I ended up doing my MBA here at FCU, and there was an open position for a graduate student, and I took it. And this is how this all started. And I grew up in Germany, so I think I have some of the international background, but I never thought much about the United Nations or anything like this. I knew what it was, but it never meant anything to me. So working here really gave me like a perspective and like a vision of what it means. And I'm really glad that I could do all of this and with all of the students here and so many programs and all these partnerships and around the globe things. So I'm really gonna miss this.
And we're gonna miss you. Well, that concludes the 2016-2017 season of United Nations Pathways Forum. Please join me in thanking our honored guest, Ambassador Pobi. And do stay and enjoy the reception. Thank you.